Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this very diverse and interesting audience. I come from Denmark, and I will like to tell you a little bit about our market integration experience in the Nordics. For a period of time, I worked at the Danish utility regulator, but now in this talk, I will give you the perspective of a practitioner. I am affiliated with ERRA Energy Analyses, which is a consultancy firm based in Denmark, and an important part of the work we do is advising different institutions throughout the world, ranging from Asia, Latin America, Africa, Europe, I would like to provide you with the perspective of the Nordic electricity market, but from a practitioner's perspective. I would like to start by telling you a little bit about the history of the Nordic electricity market. Maybe most of you know already that most of the things, the Nordic electricity market as we know it today was established during the 90s. So typically, the typical history would start around here telling you that Norway first deregulated its electricity market by 1993. An initial process of unbundling had been completed, and they created a subsidiary company to be in charge of market trading. That happened around 1993. And then by 1995, the whole structure of the Nordic electricity market was established as a consequence of a decisive move ahead to increased cooperation at the political level. Then Norway and Sweden opened a common electricity market. And after that, Finland joined and Denmark joined. By the way, we were the last ones to join the group in the Nordic electricity market, which already tells you about some of the regulatory barriers that existed at the time. What I'm trying to say, in other words, is that the process wasn't always as smooth as everybody would like to, or as one may be led to think. In parallel to that, there was a European energy liberalization process going on through the different energy packages. The first energy package at a European level was passed in 1996, and then the rest is history, which led to the establishment of a very, very well consolidated regulatory and market framework. But the message that I would like to bring you is that the process wasn't only about what happened in the 90s. Long before that, actually more than 1 century ago, you can see in this timeline that the first Nordic interconnector between Sweden and Denmark was established, and that already as early as 1932, in the eastern part of Norway, it was created an association of traders of electricity, which is something highly unusual, I would say. Electricity markets are not markets for oranges or fruits or anything like that. They are created markets, but there was an interest in cooperating from the very beginning. And I think, and I argue actually, that that is what makes a difference with respect to the Nordic electricity market. What we have today is a highly integrated system where there is a wide variety of technologies operating at the same time. So in the Nordic region, you would find hydro, you would find nuclear, you would find wind, which makes it already a very highly decarbonized electricity system, and highly varied in terms of the technologies that it's able to tap on to supply electricity to consumers. So if we see it from the typical energy trilemma, the perspective of security of supply, sustainability, and affordability, we can see that the Nordic electricity market fares pretty well. So, for example, here what you have is a graph on the net electricity flows between the Nordics and the rest of Europe. Being one of the major, Sweden and Norway being one of the major net electricity exporters to the rest of Europe. And Denmark being in some years a net importer or net exporter, and usually a transit region between the Nordics and continental Europe. So that complementarity between the different technologies and the existence of infrastructure has allowed to, on a longer-term basis, be secured against dry years when there is not much rain in Northern Europe, and in dry years where other technologies would be able to compensate. From a sustainability perspective, what you have here is the percentage of renewables, the share of renewables on final electricity consumption, and you can see that notably Norway has more than 100%. Which means that it's a net exporter. Not only is a net exporter, but it's a net exporter of green electricity. But this is quite similar for the rest of the countries, as you can see. And when it comes to affordability, we can see that post-crisis years, you know that in Europe we faced a very severe electricity crisis around year 21 and 22. We experienced among our highest historical prices. We experienced them putting great pressure to our consumers. But even after that, after the crisis has subsided, we can see how the Nordics have fared considerably better than continental Europe, having much lower prices. But how does this translate into practice? That is the question. Because I can tell you about all of these wonders, but the question is, what do you make out of this? And how can you utilize this experience? This is what I'm interested in telling you about. So I would say that we can say that we were very privileged to have very strong political will, mutual trust, and cooperation. But this is not something that can be exported everywhere. This is a lesson that it's not easily applicable everywhere. We would typically be sitting on tables where we don't always trust the others. So that is something very unique about our experience. A second element that we have is that we have a relatively simple market design, and we have shown how can that increase market efficiency over the long run and address market power issues. We're not saying that we have a perfectly functioning market, but we know that we have a pretty transparent and solid and liquid market. And we have also seen that market integration can definitely increase security of supply and mitigate market power. But once again, I challenge you to think about this again. How can you utilize this? Because some of these things that I'm telling you about are not easily exportable. So what I really want to tell you about is from how can this be translated into a different context, into different situations, into applicable lessons that you may be able to take. And these are quite personal, taken from my experience in advisory services to different countries ranging from Kenya to Indonesia to Mexico and even countries in Europe as diverse as Ireland and Germany. Lesson number one, I would suggest that you need to spend time understanding why is market integration and cross-border trade relevant for the specific country of jurisdiction. Is it the green transition? Is it the green transition only, or is it the issue of affordability, which is pressing heavily. One would typically hear that it is quite likely the issue of efficiency, of bringing down prices to the consumer, that stands at the top of the list. So I think it is very, very important to start understanding why. Because the market is not an end in itself. Creating an electricity market is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. So it is something that we create because we need to go into a different situation. What is it that we are looking after when we go there? Lesson number 2, it is very important to have a vision first and write policies and regulations later. I have experienced on many occasions that some of the institutions that I have been privileged to advise go very quickly into writing a regulation, into writing a law, into complying with what an Energy Act says, with what an energy law says. I think it is more important, if you are definitely going for a market, to understand a simple market design that everybody can understand. If we make it more complicated, then gaining the needed political engagement and stakeholder engagement will be very difficult. That is the second lesson. And the third lesson that I would like to tell you about is that, and this is a clear example comes from the Nordics, is that it is possible to start market integration and cross-border cooperation with full-fledged market reform. So if there is something that we found in the Nordics, was that it was a heterogeneous process. As I mentioned, Denmark wasn't the first country to be starting the market or to have initiated regulatory reform. However, the long tradition of cooperation and of trading came first. So it is always possible to circumvent the regulation or to find ways or to find alternative ways on how to modify it, but it is very important to start cooperation as early as possible. And when I say cooperation, I mean trading. Sit with your partner, sit with your neighboring country, find ways to design agreements, contracts that have flexible terms and that are mutually beneficial. I think that I will leave it up to here due to time constraints, but I thank you very much.